It's 6 o'clock, and we've got some people logged in here. So why don't we go ahead and get started with our official agenda. Welcome, everyone. I'm, of course, Manu Koenig, your candidate for the next Santa Cruz County Supervisor. And I'm really excited to be here tonight with some excellent panelists. Before I go ahead and introduce everyone, I just want to ground us in why we're having a panel on bike infrastructure tonight. And you may have heard the phrase going around that biking or bikes are the new toilet paper. And the meaning there is that as hard as it was to get toilet paper at the beginning of the COVID-19 pandemic, that's how hard it is to get a bike today. I noticed this when I went just to get a new helmet at Bicycle Trip the other day and overheard him saying the wait time to get your bike fixed was going to be at least 3 weeks. And you know, some of the data coming out about demand for bikes is really incredible. I've got to share a few stats with you from a recent Economist article. So in March, sales of bikes in America increased by 50% from the previous year, and sales of e-bikes have increased by 85% from March of last year. In Philadelphia, cycling overall is up 151%. Usage of New York's bike share program has increased by 67%. Italy, their government is now offering a 60% reimbursement for any bike purchase up to 500 euros. That's $545 to encourage biking. And then there's been street closures. New York City has closed 100 miles of its roads for both bike and pedestrian use, and Oakland has closed 74 miles of streets for bike and pedestrian use. And meanwhile, Paris is preparing 400 miles of new cycleways. So all of this is very exciting and begs the question, what are we doing here in Santa Cruz to take advantage of this moment for cycling and push us forward? You know, it was exciting that about a week and a half ago, we got an announcement that we'll have some outdoor dining for restaurants in the county. So this begs the question, well, are we going to enhance outdoor recreation opportunities along with it? Overall, Santa Cruz could be doing a lot better in terms of our bicycle infrastructure. And that was highlighted just a couple days ago. People for Bikes, a preeminent nonprofit organization, released ratings for cities really throughout the world. And Santa Cruz didn't do as well as we might like to have. So out of 5 possible, overall score of 5, Santa Cruz got 1.8. And compare that to San Luis Obispo, which got a 3.4, and Santa Barbara, which got a 3.3. They were actually in the top 5, both of them. So we have a lot better to do. And really, we got dinged in 2 places. One was our network. We rated only a 1.5 on that, which means that people can't safely get to their destinations, right, that our bike lanes or trails don't connect. And then we got a meager 0.6 on acceleration, which is the speed with which we're getting people to adopt bikes and that we're actually implementing new bike infrastructure. So that just, you know, again, I wanted to know what is it that we can do both in the short term to take advantage of the opportunity presented by COVID-19, and then what can we start to look to in the long term to really shift towards more bicycle infrastructure. And joining me tonight are 5 incredibly qualified panelists to help hash this out. So let me start by welcoming Adam Millard-Ball. He is an associate professor at UCSC in environmental studies, and also was very helpful, instrumental in getting the new protected bike lanes implemented on Water Street. We also have Gina Cole, Executive Director of Bike Santa Cruz County. Welcome, Gina. David Gianini, the President of the Santa Cruz County Cycling Club. Welcome, David. Thanks for joining us. Marilyn Rocky, our surprise guest this evening, who is the principal of Del Mar Elementary School and also an avid bike commuter. She commutes every day to 17th Avenue Del Mar from Aptos. Welcome, Marilyn. And Sibley Simon, the president of New Way Homes, which helps build affordable housing here in the county. So, and of course, thank all of you for attending tonight in the audience. We'll be taking questions using the Q&A feature. So if you have a question that occurs during any time in the program, you can ask it there. You can upvote other questions submitted, and we'll take those towards the end of the program. But now I want to allow our panelists to talk a little bit more about some of the stuff that they're working on. And both just, if all of you could take a moment just to say, what you're working on in general right now, and why do you think Santa Cruz, or why do you think cycling is important to the future of Santa Cruz County? And Adam, why don't we start with you?
Oh, well, thanks for the chance to be here. So, what I've been working on, well, I teach environmental studies at UC Santa Cruz, and most recently I've been working with some amazing undergraduates to develop conceptual designs for bicycle improvements, both on campus and also partly in partnership with Gina. Thank you for all your support for the students elsewhere in the city and county, including 17th Avenue. And why does cycling matter? Well, I teach environmental studies, so partly I'm motivated by the environmental reasons. It's a zero emissions way to get around. But it's also about justice. It's a low-cost means of transportation available to people who may not be able to afford a car. But most importantly, I think it's practical. Like, we can't afford to build our way out of congestion in Santa Cruz. Like, we can't afford to widen Highway 1 to cater for unlimited demand. Parking in new housing costs $60,000 a space. So biking is really the practical alternative that is completely within our means in the county.
Awesome, thank you. Gina, what are you working on, and why do you think cycling is so important?
Bike Santa Cruz County is currently working out how we maneuver through COVID. We are working with the county right now, the city of Watsonville, and potentially the city of Santa Cruz with the Slow Streets initiative to give folks some more space to walk and bike in their neighborhoods. We are also continuing our youth programs and looking to our youth advocacy work in the summer with a small group of kids. We've been working online, keeping in touch with our high school mentors. And with the events on hold, we're kind of on hold for open streets until probably next year. Cycling is important to the future of Santa Cruz for many reasons: our health and well-being, the health and well-being of our planet and our communities, giving people an option for active transportation, and encouraging people to get out on whatever kind of bike works for them, so that they can use those bikes for daily trips and get exercise and reduce the impact on the planet.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you. David, do you want to share what you've been working on and why you think cycling is important?
Well, the Santa Cruz County Cycling Club has quite a few experienced cyclists. And one of the things that we've noticed as the COVID-19 thing progresses is there are many, many people who are buying bicycles for the first time. So what we're focusing our energy on right now is bicycle classes. Skills classes, safety classes, how to maneuver around Santa Cruz, which has some real hot spots in terms of traffic difficulty in normal times. I mean, during the very first part of COVID-19, we did see a number of cars disappearing from the roads and the roads became a little more friendly, but that's not going to continue. So we would like to get as many people trained on how to ride their bicycle in a safe and efficient manner. We think that the future of bicycling is just completely wide open with the advent of the power assist bicycle. We're seeing more and more retired people joining the ranks. Folks who at one time were giving up on riding bicycles are now again riding bicycles. So fun, recreation, transportation, that's the future of bicycles in Santa Cruz County.
Yeah, I'm glad you pointed that out, that so many folks that we have almost a counterintuitive trend with e-bikes, whereas normally it's the young people that are the early adopters, but now we're actually seeing senior citizens are the ones on e-bikes more than anyone. And it's I think it's really exciting and encouraging to see as well. And how do I sign up for one of your courses if I wanted to?
We're right now, we're following the county guidelines. So our classes are on hiatus for a little while longer. And if you went to the Santa Cruz County Cycling Club website, you'd see a calendar there. And when classes resume again, they'll be on our calendar.
Great, thanks. Marilyn, what have you been up to? And why do you think cycling's important? Oh, well, you're on mute. We can't hear you.
On mute. Thanks. Sorry about that. Well, I'm in tandem with David. It's interesting he was saying that about the great courses that are available, because as an elementary school principal, what I see is the challenge of the future for our children. I spent part of my afternoon today working with one of my students and trying to set him up with a bicycle that would work for him, that was the correct size. We usually get bicycles donated at Christmas time from the fire department, and that's like a whole initiative to get kids excited about cycling and want to do it. And this bicycle didn't fit with him. So we spent some time today getting him a proper fit now that we could actually wait in line and get into the bicycle shop. And so that's exciting. That's what I'm working on, is education with students. So David, I'm going to hook up with you and get my kids lined up with you. But each year, what we do at our site and many of the school sites in Live Oak School District is we make sure that our fifth graders are educated in bicycle safety so that they are safe in the road, and hopefully that education continues with them as they become adults. A big piece, it sounds cliche, but it's so very true that the children are our future. And when we look at the positive effects that cycling creates in both health and the climate, it's huge. As our rising health costs in this country soar, if we had people in better shape, all of that would be reduced significantly. And if our children learn the importance of cycling and that connection with climate change, we can help continue to save the planet. When you look at those reports that came out, the research that came out when we all stopped and stood still during this COVID time, how the air was clearing, like from up above, looking down, oh my gosh, the air is clearing. And that's what we can do with bicyclists. If we're all cycling and make that our priority and make it doable for people to do, make it user-friendly, make it so it's not scary, make all of those things available, then I think that we contribute in a holistic way to both creating a better future for our children and then enabling our children and empowering them to move forward into taking responsibility for the world.
Yeah, I'm so glad you said that and really made that strong link with the climate crisis, Marilyn. I think, we've seen emissions globally down at something like 17%. And then, my understanding is local emissions here in Santa Cruz County, 60% of them come from transportation. So when you really want to, if you want to talk about the number one thing we can do for the climate crisis here in Santa Cruz, it really is get more people on bikes. It's something I get to critique sometimes, oh, Manu, all he cares about is bikes and that trail. And, the reality is it's because I care about so many other things the climate and health and housing, as hopefully Sibley will talk a little bit about, that I care so much about bikes. So yeah, thanks. Sibley, why don't you tell us, I think you're still on mute, but tell us a little bit about what you're working on and why you think cycling's important.
Thank you. So my professional mission is to help turn the tide on our housing crisis, meaning the expense of housing for most households in California. And that's really then about the only kind of housing we can build en masse in California responsibly is infill, denser housing. And therefore, one of the things that makes it really expensive, the biggest ticket item that isn't the apartment itself, is the parking. And so, I love cycling myself. I'm a bike commuter. I've got another bike commuter sitting with me here, who's in the just finished first grade. And but it really then intersects with my work because both public transit, walkability, and cycling, are really the way to unlock that component of making housing less expensive. And we can get more units, less parking. I mean, it's almost like magic when we're in our housing projects. So I'm focused on that, and I really want. And so what I'm working on now, I've got a whole set of projects, of housing development projects, from supportive housing to middle income workforce housing in Santa Cruz County, one in Salinas, several in Oakland, and all those are different locations. But a lot of those locations are really ripe for how do we improve the access to them with biking. But then what do we do? And this is what I'm constantly thinking about right now. What do we do in actually the design of apartment buildings and the amenities to make them efficient, but also really friendly and encourage people to bike?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, totally. And, I live in a condominium complex myself, and we do keep both our bikes in our living room, but we calculated that we spend about $40 a month, on that bike parking. And we're kind of, because we live on a second floor, we're prevented from having e-bikes, right? It's hard to get them inside. And the only bike parking in our complex is outdoors, uncovered, unsafe. So yeah, I'm really glad you're joining us. And there's so much that we can do to design for better transportation in our housing. So great, we've got some brilliant minds here. And I really want to get down to brass tacks about what kind of policies we can look at. Let's start with things that we could do during COVID-19 and in the short term that would really help move the needle. And we'll stick with the same order. So Adam, maybe you could share what's top of mind for you that we can do short term to improve cycling in the county.
I think most of the things to improve cycling can actually be done really quickly. That's one of the great advantages. It's mainly about paint and perhaps a few soft hit posts like you see on Water Street. These aren't expensive things. These aren't things that need a kind of a really long planning and funding process. It's about keeping it simple as providing some protection from traffic and that physical separation between bikes and cars. Because the priority here is, the biking infrastructure in Santa Cruz is fine if you're some 25-year-old daredevil. Where it falls down is for the rest of us. My students calculated level of traffic stress on many streets in the county, and this is a measure that really shows how stressful it is to bike around. Most of the streets they found are at levels 3 and 4, which is really good luck if you're not a daredevil, it's basically only the fearless. Mm-hmm. And to get these streets down to levels 1 or 2, which is where people of all ages, whether you're 8 years old or 80 years old, you're comfortable cycling, we need paint and we need physical separation, which can be done really quickly and cheaply with posts. So I think most of the things that to improve cycling can actually be done very quickly in the short term.
That's cool. And so I'm really interested to see your level of traffic stress study in more detail. Do you know what streets were most traveled and most stressful? I'm trying to find what would be the best place to start, maybe the best street or street.
well, the streets, there's a level of traffic stress. There's really three things that go into it. It's, first of all, is there any physical protection from cyclists? Most county streets there isn't. Secondly, it's about the speed of the traffic. And thirdly, it's about the volume and the number of lanes. And so it's almost self-evident which streets are most stressful. So in the county, we can think about streets like Soquel, streets like 41st Avenue, streets like even out towards the Corralitos area, Freedom. But anywhere where you have fast-moving cars or a high volume of cars and no physical separation, these are streets that are really stressful to bike on if you're not some 25-year-old daredevil.
Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah, and do you know off the top of your head how much the new protected bike features on Water Street, how much that project cost total?
That Water Street project was actually really cheap because the city of Santa Cruz did it in conjunction with repaving, which was going to happen anyway. And so the key here is to coordinate. Like if a street is going to be repaved, then let's upgrade the bike infrastructure at the same time. And let's prioritize the streets to repaving where those safety improvements are desperately needed, whether it's on corridors to schools or recreation centers, when hopefully they'll reopen soon, or to beaches, or where there's other places where there's a lot of demand for biking.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so you're talking about that quick build approach of timing improvements with regular street resurfacing. And I know San Jose, for example, has used that to great effect, putting in about 10 miles of protected bike lanes in a year. So it's glad to see I'm glad to see we're bringing that to this county. Gina, what do you see as the best thing that we can do in the short term, during COVID or in a year or less? You're on mute there.
I forget all the time. Sorry. Kind of doubling down on what Adam said and really giving kudos to the city of Santa Cruz for laying down the paint and doing that in conjunction with their repaving process. I think that's definitely on their books, and there's a lot of other projects that are coming in, and they're really working on intersections to make those safer for cyclists. City of Watsonville has also followed suit and has set out green lanes for cyclists on a lot of their side streets, which has been really, really fantastic. And we're proposing, or a proponent of, little pop-up bike lanes to really demonstrate to folks how it feels, how differently it feels. So along the lines of what's going on Water Street, is having a physical and visual separation for folks between you and a car, a cyclist and a car. It serves to narrow the travel lane, which is a slowing technique that we use, or that I'm not a traffic girl, but the traffic planners use to slow traffic. And it will, I don't know, like as Adam said, the biggest fear factor is that proximity to cars and the speed of the cars and the volume of the cars. I consider myself kind of a daredevil cyclist, but there are roads that I won't ride at peak time. And sadly, a lot of the roads from Watsonville to Santa Cruz do become highly congested during those peak travel times for commuters. So having something in place to help us navigate safely. Paint is great, but a protected bike lane would be greater.
Right. Yeah. And I know I'm really excited about Bike Santa Cruz County's pop-up protected bike lane project on 17th Avenue. I see Marilyn nodding her head. We've got 3 schools on 17th, Live Oak Elementary, Del Mar Elementary, and of course Shoreline Middle School. So can you just share an update with us, Gina, on where that project is? And
currently that project's on hold. It's a very volunteer intensive project, and with COVID we just can't have that amount of people in that close of space working with each other. So we're kind of feeling that out to see how we can proceed with the fact that we needed like 50 or 60 volunteers to work multiple shifts in order to lay the infrastructure down.
Interesting. All right. Well, if you figure it out, I'm happy to volunteer, and I know a lot of other folks would be too. So keep us tuned. Yeah, David. All right, you're up. What do you see as the best thing we can do in the short term?
Well, I'm really happy to hear the first two panelists talk about separating fast-moving, heavy objects from slower-moving, human-powered objects. That separation is really, really important. I laud the city and the county for the work that they've done with green painting. But, you know, I have several friends that are automobile-centric folks, and they kind of educated me on the effectivity of that green paint by saying to me, green paint? What green paint? And they travel all along routes that have recently been upgraded with lanes and paint. So I'd really like to underscore that keeping fast-moving, heavy vehicles separate from slower-moving, human-powered vehicles is a really, really important thing. The other thing that comes up from the members of the Santa Cruz County Cycling Club almost every meeting that we have is so we're doing things like we did on Water Street to separate cars from people. It's really, really excellent. And the more we do that, the safer that cyclists will be. Cycling safety also means for us having your bike there when you return from your shopping trip or whatever. And so the more bicycle lockers, secure bicycle storage is really important for a person to make that decision to use a bicycle instead of an automobile. So me personally, I love Bike Santa Cruz County and the service that they provide at the farmer's market. I can ride my bicycle to the farmer's market and use the bike valet service and know that I can wander around the farmer's market for hours on end and that my bicycle is going to be there when I get back. So two things for me: separate bike lanes, keep those cars away from cyclists, and some safe place to store my bicycle when I use it to run my errands.
Great.
Thank you.
Yeah, more bike parking, definitely needed. Marilyn, what do you see as something we can do in the short term here?
I think of it as a two-prong approach. I think it is personal empowerment and what you can do as an individual to make yourself safe. And of course, in my field, and also to educate children to how they can make themselves safe, which also is an empowerment. And then also exactly what these wonderful panelists have talked about in terms of all the different things, the pop-up lanes. 2 summers ago, we attended a, it was Zero Vision, and where they were talking about the changes that they made. I believe it was in the city of Palo Alto, simply by on big wide streets, making smaller lanes in order to, wider bike lanes, smaller lanes in order to slow traffic down. And that seemed to be working really effectively. And they also said it was not cost prohibitive, that it was very cheap to do, that it had a psychological impact on the driver, because like what David's saying is the driver, no one's trying to run us over, but they just don't see us and they don't pay attention always. And I know I drive a car occasionally, and I'm certain that many people can accuse me of, not being completely safe in my lane. In terms of personal safety, I have like a little exhibit here. So this is a pool noodle, and I attach I attached this onto the back rack of my bike. Yeah, Gina's giving me the thumbs up. Love it. I attach it so that it sticks out 3 feet. And because that's legally what we're supposed to have is 3 feet of safety. And I, rep it and it's there. And I'll tell you what, my husband implemented this for me, Phil. And I was like, oh no, I'm not gonna, oh my goodness, really? And now I appreciate him more because it's a true sign of empowerment, because the day I did that, my bicycle cycling life became so much more safe, and not ever in a negative way. Cars would go, oh, and they would just completely go around me because it was so obvious that this is my space bubble, stay out of my space bubble. So anyway, yeah.
That's very interesting. Yeah, I hadn't even thought about what we can personally do on our own bikes to improve things, but the pool noodle is a fantastic idea. Thank you. Sibley, what do you think we should do during COVID, or in the next year or less?
I could talk all day, but
Okay.
some highlights. A little thing that COVID highlighted to me biking around was annoyance before, and it became much bigger during COVID, is all the stoplights that we have that don't turn green if you're only a cyclist waiting. And so, like in your district, the 17th and Brommer, if you're going east on 17th and you want to turn left, you could stand there and you're still over the little cycling sized ring in the pavement, but until a car comes by, you're either standing there forever or you run the red light when there's no cars. So I mean, imagine if our intersections did that for cars. So there would be a huge panic and Public Works would be out there the next day. So just, hey, fix those. I also think we have a lot of positive programs that are working, that if it wasn't for jurisdiction boundaries or bureaucracy, we should lean into our strengths. Before COVID, the bike share in Santa Cruz was a huge success. It wasn't without its issues or annoyances, and more education should go into helping people ride them safely, etc. But huge success. The biggest problem with it is you hit the city boundary, and most people don't know where the city boundary is, and boom, you get fined. And even that went on for a while, and you can't ride into the county. So why isn't the county? And I know it was slowly starting to be worked on, a little bit of live oak, but when successes like that happen and we figure out the wrinkles, that's what we should put energy into. Oh, it's proven, let's go. The metrics on the use of bike share in Santa Cruz were above 95% of the jurisdictions that got those bike share. So that, that was great. Another one like that is the bike storage boxes that do exist, for example, in the city. But you go across Ocean Street to the county building, and I can't use my card to park my bike in a same kind of box because it's a county-owned property instead of the city-owned properties. Why can't businesses that want those boxes get them, etc. There's a bike parking deficiency, especially in the unincorporated county, more so than in the downtowns. And I don't think we should just impose those as extra costs on our businesses, especially right now in COVID-19. But those are inexpensive things we can do to, get more of the businesses having bike parking in front of them. And then, and a tiny little thing I noticed, when you go into big parking lots like the Crow's Nest or whatever, they got bike parking somewhere. But as you know, bike parking's in different places. Every bike thing looks different that you lock yourself to. You go in, how do you find it if you're a cyclist? I spend time, I'm in a parking lot. If I was a car, I would just be looking for an empty spot, but I cycle around the parking lot looking for where the heck is the bike parking that does exist, And so I could imagine like little decals on the things that you only notice if you're a cyclist to just point you roughly in the right direction to find the bike parking, especially in multi-business, parking spots. I think there's on and on things we can do. One little thing I'll encourage people right now, they could write our state senator about the bill that just passed the assembly yesterday, which is the bike parking bill. It's literally, you could just write our state senator and say the bike parking bill. Please vote for it when it comes up in the state Senate, which is that if housing projects build more bike parking, then they can reduce their amount of car parking. And while, in the city of Santa Cruz, you have to build a lot of bike parking with housing. That's great. But like so many, positive thing or good intention things we do, we just add rules, and you don't build any less car parking. You just build more bike parking. And electric vehicle charging stations that don't count as a parking spot, and so on. And so this is like a great state bill that says, just to a degree, you get to reduce, and more if you're affordable housing or close to public transit, if you provide great quality bike locker, that kind of stuff. So want to support that bill, which would be policy that's on deck, but things need attention if they're going to get passed this year.
Yeah.
So that's a few things on the top of my list.
Those are all great. Yeah. And I'll definitely write to our state senator and support that bill. I wanted to ask specifically about that. I was going to ask this later, but since you bring it up, and you also mentioned how important it is that we do look at reducing parking requirements, because that just like magic would unlock so much housing. So as we look at that, do you think that should be a trade-off? Like, okay, you can reduce the amount of parking required on site if you provide bike parking, or, as you said, is that just adding more requirements and we should just say, go ahead and eliminate parking requirements and, let people kind of make up the difference with bike parking? Which would you prefer to see? So,
I mean, as with all these things, it's a matter of degree. There's still going to be a lot of people with cars. And one of the things we have to do over time, have more of our housing near jobs. Because if somebody has to commute from Watsonville to find housing they afford to a job in downtown Santa Cruz, much less over the hill to San Jose, they're not going to bike commute every day, right? So part of it is over time, we got to build housing. So it's all about location. So, in the location where there's clear demand for housing, where people can bike to a lot of their trips, then but zoning is all by place. So we've got the jurisdictional rule infrastructure to say, well, in these downtown zones, build bike parking, not car parking. Mm-hmm. And, and the state's already doing this, but we can look at how to fine tune it. That's going to work better for us. And I think in your district, that's where makes a lot of sense to do, because the state is already saying, well, now in downtown Santa Cruz, anything within half mile of the downtown bus station, affordable housing projects don't have any parking requirement anymore. That just went into effect this year. And now, there's going to be more locations that hopefully that bill passes, more bike parking would mean somewhat less car parking requirement. So you got to be sensitive to that. We'd have to get down to lots of details, because this is not 100% of people are going to bike all the time. But, if we do it right, it's going to build on itself and encourage it. And so I think, Live Oak is a real place where there's a fair amount of bikeability that exists or can be created. And so we could look at the nuance of well, how much could you reduce parking and be, sensitive to people who want to be able to park on the street as well. And while we're in tandem with improving our bike infrastructure, I think there's a lot we can do. And one of the last thing I'll say on that, it's like affordability, like a lot of other kind of things. Sometimes we get in the mindset of any house or apartment we build has to work for everyone. And that's not, you can't afford to build housing that way. Just like we do build studios and we build 3 bedrooms, and we're not assuming a big family is going to be in the studio, right? We got to have a 3-bedroom for that, whatever. And the same thing's here too. I think we got to allow more options. So if somebody says, oh, I'm going to build a whole building and this is going to be a bike centric place, we're not going to have parking. We're going to all on biking and a bike fixing shop and bike programming, and we're going to contribute to the cost of the bike lane out in front of the street and a lot of things like that. Well, then let's not have parking, and let's support that option, because there's 10% of the people who would love to pay a little less for housing and have a great bike amenities. So I don't know, there's my answer. I'll stop there.
That's great. Yeah. That's exciting. I've seen some of those bike only communities popping up in Germany and other places. So it's definitely a real option that some people want. Let's just go through one more time real quickly. We talked, everyone had a chance to talk about short-term improvements. I just want you guys to have an opportunity to mention long-term policy solutions that you see as well for biking. We can keep it kind of brief, because then I'm going to just share with everyone some potential policies and poll the audience as well. Since we've got a good number of people on the line, I'd love to get their input. So, Adam, is there anything you haven't mentioned or haven't heard mentioned, long-term policies you'd like to see implemented?
Sure. There's 3 things I'd like to mention really quickly. And the first is, I saw some of the questions in the chat were about enforcement. Mm-hmm. And I'm a little lukewarm, to be honest, on enforcement. partly because if we have to enforce something, that means we failed in terms of the design, that it means we've let fast-moving traffic get too close to bikes. It means we don't have the physical protection. Then secondly, I think that everywhere in the US we're seeing right now that enforcement is not even. Like, enforcement tends to target communities of color. And so moving to an enforcement first approach, I think, is a failure on several levels. The two long-term issues that I would like to suggest are, first of all, right now we treat cycling almost as an afterthought, where there's a little space, like let's have a bike lane here, and where the roadway narrows, then it disappears. And we can't do that. It's like having Highway 17 or another freeway where you go along at 60 miles an hour, and then the freeway ends and there's a bit of dirt road, and then you have to kind of get out and push your car around a corner, and then the freeway starts again. Like, we don't have this continuous bike infrastructure right now. We just have it where it's convenient for the traffic engineers. And that's one of the long-term culture shifts that I think has to change the system. And we shouldn't be arguing over every single parking space to be removed to the city council or board of supervisors. We just have to say, hey, there's a policy, and okay, there's not enough room to keep the park and the bike lane. Sorry, the parking has to go. And then the second long-term change I'd love to see is echoing what Sibley said about housing. Like, how cycling long-term is not really about cycling infrastructure. It's about housing. It's having more housing in the urban core and the kind of more central parts of the county, so people can afford to live within bicycling distance of home, of work and school and shops. So it's removing some of the crazy barriers we have that make it so expensive and so difficult to build anything in Santa Cruz County. And so making it possible to build more housing, particularly housing with less parking, or if people want it, no parking at all, why not? This is the kind of long-term priority for the county to move away from the private car.
Great, that's fantastic. Yeah, Gina, what do you see as long-term things we should be pursuing?
I want to circle back to what Marilyn had said about Vision Zero, and Vision Zero is really creating infrastructure and creating shared roadways that result in zero crashes and zero fatalities. And in order to do that, the long-term goal is complete streets, where we do have streets where we're either compatible or we're separated to create safe places for both pedestrians, cyclists, and motorists to coexist. And again, the cities and the counties have plans for that. There are safe routes to school plans that, again, are long-term, but that look at safely getting our kids from home to school, and active transportation plans that are meant to implement infrastructure ideas and changes that would encourage people to ride their bikes on a daily basis. And the other big picture long-term thing is that we're chipping away at the rail trail, that we have that in place for our future. So again, Vision Zero and complete streets ideas, following the safe routes to school plans for the city and the county, and following our active transportation plans.
Great, yeah, thank you. David, what do you see long-term as the best thing we could do for cycling in the county?
Well, I think that one of the things, as you mentioned early on in tonight's fair here, is that People for Bikes gave us a pretty low rating on a number of things. And when I look at cities that get a very high rating, I see that those cities provide an interconnected network of cycling infrastructure, so that people who need to go to the doctor's office, they need to go to the post office, they need to get some groceries, they can do all of those things on a bicycle safe infrastructure. So I would say for long term, Vision Zero is absolutely an excellent goal, and an interconnected network of cycling infrastructure that gets people where they need to go. It'd be just awesome. And we can look at the People for Bikes website for ideas on how to do that.
Great. All right. Yeah. Let's make sure people can get where they're going safely at the end of the day. Marilyn, what do you think long term? What would make the biggest difference?
You know, I think it's all been stated, and for this time, you know, because I know we're trying to stick to an agenda so that we really listen to the folks in the chat. But just, yes, repeat Vision Zero for sure. Yeah. And then also, personally, I don't know enough about SLO and Santa Barbara. But if they're successful, it's, you know, they got higher ratings. Why reinvent the wheel, right? Why we don't have time. We really don't have time, this cycling situation. This has gone on too long. So let's look at what they did and see if we can duplicate that here in Santa Cruz County.
Yeah, totally agree. Let's look at what's working. Sibley, is there anything you want to add right now?
Yeah, I want to even more so than what Adam was saying. I think we've got to have a mind shift in the public works department, so within our county and the cities and county, and we're still very car centric there and parking centric. And so sometimes, you know, there is a bike program or it's a Bolt add-on or whatever, and we've got to work to flip that, all kinds of public and active transportation followed by cars. And, you know, we have, and it's a real mindset that's not there yet. So that's an internal working of the government thing that it really has to change. Second thing on my list would be the bike boulevards, you know, which are for pedestrians as well as bikes. You know, I'm surprised we didn't do more of that here this spring during COVID, like a lot of cities did, with just miles and miles and miles of closing streets to non-local cars. But there's, you know, cities like Berkeley that have tons of that way pre-COVID, where if you live on that street, you can drive your car in, but there's no through car traffic. People love that, really quiet streets, and bikes can always go through. And there's a lot of places we could do that in our county. And then thirdly, I think it's really important when you're looking long term, you know, the modern bicycle has roughly been similar technology within, you know, modern improvements for a century, and that is now rapidly changing. And we've mentioned e-bikes. I think the wave of e-bikes is just starting, but also what even is a bicycle is already expanding and is going to keep expanding. And we're going to have these little electric vehicles, and there's going to be things that are very much in between bikes, e-bikes and cars, and in between e-bikes and scooters. I mean, I saw some the other day that really seem like a scooter, but they're really an e-bike, you know, and everything else. And I think that each time there's another variation that's going to be more people that thing is right for. And we got to, you know, we're trying to react to decades of increased bicycle use and finally get our streets. But if we want to think ahead, it's think about, there's going to be a whole spectrum of small scale, one person electric devices that people use to get around. How do we incorporate that in street, you know, and not just make a bike lane that's now great for bikes, but it's not good for all these other things that don't work either.
Right. Yeah. How do we plan transportation to be catching up with technology or facilitating new technology as it comes out? Yeah. I'm also glad that Sibley, that you mentioned some of the bike boulevards that are going in, and I wanted to try a quick little audience poll here, just about some short-term options that we could do in the county, mostly mid-county here. So, you know, which of the following short-term policy options would you support? Installing a pop-up protected bike lane on 17th Avenue, extending the East Cliff path from 30th Avenue to 17th Avenue by making that street one-way, closing a lane on Soquel Avenue for bikes, and changing Monterey Bay Community Power's $1,000 electric vehicle subsidy to be for four $250 e-bike subsidies. So go ahead and answer that, and we'll look at those results here in a little bit. And I also want to get started on some of the audience questions as well, since we've just got 10 minutes left. So let's see. The first question is for Marilyn. I've seen the enclosed bike you were riding last year. Can you explain what it is and where you were comfortable riding it on the street?
Okay, so I have a new e-bike that I got for Mother's Day. It's so awesome. It's called the Pegasus, and it's kind of a step up from what I had. I had an amazing bike that I drove into the ground. It's called an Evo Street Bike Electric. It was like kind of shaped like a scooter. So I think that's probably the one that might be being referred to. And or it could be, I'm not sure if this question is also about, I had an elf. I don't know if anybody knows what the elves were, but they're very much like what you were describing earlier, Sibley, where it was sort of like a egg-shaped encasement over the frame of a bicycle. So it was kind of a car bike kind of thing. So, the elf, we wound up donating. It wasn't suitable for the streets of Santa Cruz because Santa Cruz is so bumpy and everything was very tight on that. And it was kind of like being in, one of those joy cars when you're little, made out of cardboard. So, then I moved into this next bike, which was an Evo Easy Ride Street, which I loved. And I took that everywhere, rode that everywhere. I wasn't comfortable doing any kind of mountain biking with it because I'm just basically a street commuter. And then my current bike, which I love, I take literally everywhere. It's my commute partner to wherever I go. So yeah, I don't know if that completely answers the question, but very comfortable. Love my e-bike. It is the wave of the future, as Sibley said. It's so fun and great and awesome.
Awesome, thanks. Let's see, the next question, David, you mentioned bike lockers and bike parking. And maybe Gina, you know the answer to this, but how much does a bike locker cost? And do we know how much those get used, for example, in the downtown area or other places where they are?
I just did a quick search, and if you were to buy them yourself, they're between $700 and $1,400 for a 1 to 2 person or 2 bike locker. Those are like the ones that they have downtown. And I find that most of those bike lockers downtown are usually full. The ones in the parking areas around the downtown areas. The ones there's several over at the metro station, and those are generally full. And I would agree, we don't have enough of them. I'm not sure what's up at UCSC. Adam, maybe you could talk about what's up there for students to use. I don't think that there's any super secure places at Cabrillo College to lock your bikes. But the bill from Robert Rivas that went through the assembly is a start on being able to provide incentives for builders to create bike parking in lieu of automobile parking.
Cool. Great. I'll move on to another question here, maybe that you could answer, Adam, which is the city collecting pre-post implementation data for the Water Street Bike Project to determine, how many more cyclists we get on that?
I honestly don't know. I hope they are, but I don't know either way. Maybe Gina knows. But the part of that question was also, is a segment too short to make a difference? And I think certainly all of these segments, we should see a difference. Like any individual link in the network, if we make it better, the evidence from other cities is that this gets more people on bikes. But the bigger gains, and certainly when it's part of a coherent network without kind of gaps where the bike is meant to dematerialize and then rematerialize the other side of the freeway on-ramp or something like that. So certainly these individual links are very useful and worthwhile, but the bigger, longer term gains will come if they're part of a coherent network.
Got it. Gina, it looked like you shook your head. You don't know whether or not the city's collecting any implementation data. All right. We can't hear you.
I know, sorry. Probably the Public Works, Transportation Public Works might have the answer to that. I know that Claire would probably have the answer to that.
Okay.
We can get it for you.
I'll follow up with her. Next question is, could the city or county adopt something like a dig once policy where every time we need to replace a piece of public infrastructure, resurface a road, you know, put in a new water main, you name it, or replace a water main, that we evaluate the potential for bike infrastructure? Anyone who wants that one? Or, yeah.
Just say yes.
Great idea.
Just say, okay. Maybe I should ask, have other cities done that? Does anyone know? No? Okay.
Sure.
Moving on then. You know, this is a big one. You know, we all want more bike infrastructure, but what sources of funds can we access, and how quickly can we build protected bike lanes to create a network of safe bike lanes throughout the county? So any ideas on additional sources of funds? Yeah, Gina?
There are currently, there's funds available from Caltrans, from the state, that are infrastructure related. There are, maybe that's the biggest source. There's also, and those trickle down through the counties. So the counties are all right now working on grants. A lot of the counties and the other agencies are working on grants through those funding streams. There is also, and I'm forgetting the name of it right now. I'll have to skip, but there are funding sources for that come from the state and then from other like big orgs. But for the most part, the funding is coming from Caltrans for infrastructure stuff.
Got it. Yeah, I mean, you know, definitely with the budget cuts we're seeing, I think implementing new systems and getting creative is going to be necessary. And, you know, Sibley, I'm interested to hear, as far as funding goes, if you think there's anything we can do around housing. You know, you mentioned, you know, some of these cycling communities, maybe we could give something like reduced parking requirements, and in return for those communities helping to fund bike infrastructure for everyone nearby. You know, is that feasible? Have you seen any examples of that?
I have seen examples of housing projects, including affordable housing projects, that have paid for bike improvements at least on the block that's in front of them. You know, so you know, just in the way that, like, you know, I have a housing project in Santa Cruz, and we might need to pay for a left turn lane to be put in because the intersection's already a disaster, and if we're going to have more people live there, you know, we got to improve it. So you know, the same thing can be true with biking. I guarantee you, any developer of housing at any level would love to trade those $60,000 parking spots for a $20,000 contribution to bike infrastructure being put in that the city's doing, or whatever. You know, there's no question you could make a trade-off that people would jump at. You know, that Barry Swenson project at the bottom end of Pacific in Santa Cruz that was finished, I think, summer before last, and is, you know, fully leased up. You know, market rate housing project, decently fancy, I would say. You know, they had to pay into the car parking district, and then they had to build 2 levels of underground parking, and a lot of it is going completely unused. And so that really added to the cost of the project. And there's parking sitting there unused because in that case, it's already downtown, and without anything special, people want to walk and bike and, you know, have less cars. So I just think, if the modest amount of funding is needed for the stanchions or the repainting and the different things like that, or curb cuts, whatever's needed to make, you know, modest investments to help with that, if that can be traded off super expensive parking, like, no question. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Look, can I just add? I think, to be honest, that's the wrong way around. Like, we shouldn't be putting more obstacles in place of housing developers that want to reduce parking. It's the parking and the extra car traffic that is really causing the problems for bike safety. And so we should be charging developers that do want to provide lots of parking impact fees to cover the costs of that parking, on congestion, on bike safety, on slowing down transit and everything else. Let's have an impact fee for parking rather than charging developments that are trying to promote biking and walking and transit use.
Right, that's interesting. We'll get the money from the car impact fees to pay for the solution of bikes. Yeah, and one other source of funds that I saw, I believe it was Hoboken, New Jersey, was trialing, was they were implementing something like a 25-cent fee on rentals of jump bikes or Lime scooters, etc. And that became a new source of funds to make sure there's more bike parking, more protected lanes, and so that, as I think it was Sibley mentioned, super successful bike share programs that we've had in Santa Cruz, as we continue to expand those, that they're also helping to pay for safe infrastructure for everyone. Just let's see, we're out of time here. It's 7 o'clock. Thank you everyone for answering the poll. Gina, you'll be happy to know that installing pop-up protected bike lanes on 17th Avenue was the most popular short-term solution, with 58% of support from everyone who answered, followed by extending East Cliff from 30th to 17th by making a one-way street. So yeah, I think with that, we'll go ahead and close the panel. I just want to thank all of you for contributing tonight. I know I'm going to have to rewatch. I learned a lot of things, and we'll take some more notes. Thank you everyone for joining tonight. We had great attendance, and if we did not answer your question during the panel, we'll stay on, follow those up with text, and you can also email me at manuforsupervisor@gmail.com, and we'll answer questions that way as well. We'll have this recording posted to my website, and we'll share it on social media soon. So again, thank you everyone for coming. Couldn't have done it without you awesome panelists. So thank you very much.
Thanks for the chance to come.
Yeah.
Thank you all.
Bye now.